Thank you all so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. It's very nice to know that there are people who are concerned, because I'm sure you'd rather all be sitting at home, I don't know, watching. Last time the excuse was the American debates were on, so that kept a lot of people at home. But anyhow, tonight is really important, and especially in light of what happened on Friday in Paris. You know, we're going to be silenced soon, so that we will not be able to criticize anything. Not the Muslims, not Islam, not anything. We won't be able to say the word refugee, migrant, Hijra, whatever it happens to be. We will be totally silenced. And that's why it's really important to understand. And that's why it's such a pleasure to have with us tonight Deborah Weiss. I first met Deborah in 2012 when you spoke at an Act for America conference. And I was really blown away by her, and I said, oh my God, you know, I have to bring you to Canada, we have to bring you up here and everything. Well, it's only taken 3 years, but that's not too bad. And she spoke again this year, and I have to tell you, I mean, she gave such a barn-burner speech that when she drew her last breath at the end of it, I said, you're coming to Canada. Anyhow, just quickly, Deborah is an attorney, she's an author, and a public speaker specializing in free speech and terrorism-related issues. She is considered an expert in the defamation of religions, United Nations resolutions, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is the OIC, and CARE. Formerly, she was the Manhattan Director for the Forbes for President campaign. She was Assistant Corporation Counsel in the Giuliani administration and a counsel for the Committee on House Oversight in Congress. She is the author of the recently published monograph titled The Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Jihad Against Free Speech, the primary writer and researcher for the book Council on American Islamic Relations, its use of lawfare and intimidation, and a contributing author to the book Saudi Arabia and the Global Islamic Terrorist Network. Deborah's articles have appeared in National Review Online, The Washington Times, Front Page Magazine, and has been published in the Weekly Standard, American Spectator Online, and many, many other publications. She speaks regularly throughout the United States. Deborah is also a survivor of the 9/11 terrorist attack in New York City. So, let's give a big, warm Montreal welcome to our guest speaker, Deborah Weiss.
Well, first I want to thank ACT for Canada. Can you hear me? Like this? Okay. I want to thank ACT for Canada for holding this event, and for Valerie for inviting me 3 years later. It's all the great work that you do to raise awareness of this issue. And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your schedules to come and educate yourselves on this really important matter. I was asked to speak to you about Islamist attack on free speech. Freedom of speech is a cornerstone freedom, critical for religious freedom, human rights, and national security. Islamist groups around the globe understand the importance of language, and that is why they're working fastidiously to control, silence, and ultimately criminalize all speech that sheds a negative light on Islam. One of the main groups behind the push to stifle criticism of Islam is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC. The OIC is the second largest international organization in the world, behind only the UN. It's the largest Islamic organization in the world, claiming to represent the entire Islamic Ummah. Its long-term goals are the establishment of an Islamic caliphate and the worldwide implementation of Sharia law. It's comprised of 56 UN member states, plus the Palestinian Authority, and it constitutes the most powerful voting bloc in the UN. And yet, most people have never heard of it. The OIC consists of some of the most egregious human rights violators in the world, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, and Sudan. And still, it has a stranglehold on the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council passes resolution after resolution condemning the only free country in the Middle East, Israel, while turning a blind eye to the real human rights violations committed in the OIC countries. The OIC shows no concern for the slaughter of Christians in the Middle East and Africa, the public execution of homosexuals in Iran, the forced marriages of little girls who are basically raped, the amputations of those accused of stealing, the flogging and jailing of dissidents, the gender apartheid, and the total rejection of freedom of religion and freedom of speech that is commonplace in the OIC countries. These practices are permissible under Sharia law, and they go unaddressed in the Human Rights Council, because to criticize them would be to, quote, defame Islam, a sin that's worse than the crimes themselves. The OIC and other Islamist groups consider all speech that sheds a negative light on Islam to constitute defamation, even if it's true and even if it's mere opinion, both of which are constitutionally protected speech in the United States. And the OIC has deftly maneuvered to pass numerous resolutions in the UN to combat such defamation. In 2005, the OIC launched a 10-year program of action, a major component of which was to, quote, combat Islamophobia, unquote. It emphasized that it's the responsibility of the entire international community to combat defamation of Islam. In the West, we assume that Islamophobia is bigotry or prejudice. But when the OIC says it, it means anything that interferes with its Islamist supremacist ideals. In effect, the OIC's charge of Islamophobia is tantamount to blasphemy. When Wikipedia refused to remove depictions of the Muslim prophet Muhammad from its English language website, that was Islamophobic. It's Islamophobic when Geert Wilders says he's living in hiding due to death threats by Muslims, even though it's true. And it was Islamophobic when the EU asked Iran to drop the death penalty for the crime of apostasy. But most importantly, despite the fact that jihadis themselves admit that they are motivated by their faith, if you associate any interpretation of Islam with terrorist acts, then you are an Islamophobe. The OIC's primary goal was to have the UN adopt a resolution to, quote, counter Islamophobia and call on all nation states to enact domestic laws to do the same, including deterrent punishments. We're now in the final year of the 10-year plan, and it's safe to say that the OIC is achieving its goals. Resolution 1618 to combat intolerance based on religion or belief, and its subsequent implementation process, known as the Istanbul process, has paved the way for countries around the world, especially targeting the West, to clamp down on speech deemed Islamophobic. The OIC's desire for blasphemy laws in the West and in Europe have also made incredible advancements over the last decade. Sometimes in cooperation with the OIC and sometimes independently, now many European countries all have laws in place that silence and punish public statements that defame Islam. The laws go by different names. Sometimes they're called hate speech laws, sometimes denigration of a recognized religion, or sometimes public order laws, but they all serve as proxies for blasphemy codes, which is speech that sheds a negative light on Islam, and they do it by deterring that speech with laws and punishing it when it occurs. Now Europe is working to criminalize the speech, not just make it a civil violation. In 2008, the EU Council issued a framework decision on, quote, racism and xenophobia, unquote, the purpose of which was to define a common criminal law approach, not a civil law approach, to racism and xenophobia in Europe. The decision states that an offense exists when one publicly, quote, incites violence or hatred, notice that's an emotion, toward a group or member of a group defined by race, color, religion, nationality, or ethnicity. And it specifies that the punishment for such speech must be a criminal penalty of no less than 1 to 3 years in jail. It is therefore relevant that this past June, James McConnell, a pastor in Ireland, was arrested for a church sermon he gave, which was streamed live on the internet. It basically expressed the view that Islamic doctrine is satanic. Subsequently, the Belfast Islamic Center made a complaint to the police about, quote, a possible hate crime motive. The pastor was arrested and charged with sending via a public electronic communication network a message that is, quote, grossly offensive, a violation of the 2003 Communications Act. The pastor is 78 years old, he's in very poor health, and he refuses to recant his words. He's scheduled to go to trial in December and faces the possibility of 6 months in jail. And he's expressed the view that prosecutions for hate speech in the UK target Christians and are not equally applied to hate speech by Muslims. And he's correct about that. In Canada, human rights commissions and tribunals exist in almost every province, established for the purpose of guaranteeing equal rights for all. But, as most of you can probably attest, application of the Canadian Human Rights Act has gone very awry, partly due to faulty text. Ezra Levant, publisher of the former magazine, The Western Standard, reprinted the infamous Danish Muhammad cartoons with an accompanying article arguing that journalists shouldn't censor themselves due to fear of a small radicalized Muslim community. A Muslim organization filed a complaint against the magazine, and Levant was prosecuted under the infamous Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, which read, quote, no person shall publish, issue, or display any statement, publication, sign, or representation that is likely to expose a person or class of persons to hatred based on race or religion, unquote. Note, no actual harm is required to prove the case. No intent to foster harm is necessary. The only requirement is that the communication is likely to expose a person to hatred, a standard which is obviously vague and subjective. And to make matters worse, truth is no defense. So it's no wonder that for over 30 years, until Levant's case in 2008, the Commission had a 100% conviction rate. After years of lobbying, hearings, and battling politicians, Section 13 was finally repealed last year.